The hum of the aeroplane filled the cabin as I adjusted my seatbelt and prepared myself for the flight to Greece. I had been dreaming of this trip for years, eager to lose myself in the sun-soaked landscapes and ancient ruins. Beside me sat a man who, at first glance, seemed entirely unremarkable. He was quiet, with a book perched on his lap that he appeared to have barely touched. His dark hair was neatly combed and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong but unassuming forearms. He radiated a kind of stillness, an introverted calm that seemed so unlike my own effervescent energy. "Excuse me," he said in a low, measured voice. "Is this your book?" He held up a guide to Greece that I had mistakenly placed on his tray table. His accent was unmistakably British, clipped and precise, but warm nonetheless. I laughed, slightly embarrassed. "Yes, it is. I must have set it there by accident." That simple exchange grew into a conversation that lasted the entire flight. He introduced himself as Edward, a civil engineer who loved travel but hated crowds. He described himself as a man of few words, but when he spoke, each sentence carried weight. He was thoughtful, charming in his reserved manner, and refreshingly genuine. We spoke about everything from ancient Greek mythology to our favorite childhood memories. By the time we landed, we had exchanged numbers, an almost electric excitement hanging in the air between us. As we parted at the airport, heading to our respective destinations, I felt a pang of disappointment. But it didn't last long. That very evening, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Edward. I hope I'm not being too forward, but could we talk again? I feel like we have unfinished conversations." And so began the whirlwind romance that led to my greatest joy and deepest heartbreak. Edward wasn't the kind of man to shower me with grand gestures, but what he lacked in extravagance, he made up for in sincerity. On our second day in Greece, he took me to a quiet, tucked-away cafe with a view of the Aegean Sea. The sun bathed everything in golden light as we sipped coffee and talked. He told me he had never felt this way about anyone before and that he already envisioned a future with me. "I see you as my wife," he said earnestly, his grey eyes locking onto mine. "The mother of my children." At the time, his words melted me. His unwavering confidence, combined with his subtle, understated manner, made me feel cherished. I had dated men before who were loud and brash, who tried too hard to impress. Edward was different. He was deliberate, and every moment with him felt intentional. When we returned to England, our romance flourished. Edward introduced me to his family, a close-knit but slightly reserved group, and I introduced him to mine. Within a year, we were married in a small, intimate ceremony at a countryside manor. He looked dashing in his tailored suit, and I'll never forget the way he looked at me as I walked down the aisle, like I was the most precious thing in the world. Our first few years of marriage felt like a dream. Edward and I shared quiet evenings cooking together, long walks through the park, and spontaneous weekends away. He had a way of making me feel adored without needing to say it aloud constantly. When our daughter, Amelia, was born, and later our son, Oliver, our happiness seemed complete. Edward was attentive, doting on both me and the children. He would hold Amelia in his arms and hum soft lullabies or build elaborate Lego castles with Oliver. For a time, I truly believed I had found my happily ever after. But as the years went on, Edward's attentive nature began to fade. At first it was small things, forgetting to pick up milk on the way home or scrolling through his phone while I tried to tell him about my day. Then more troubling patterns emerged. He became increasingly preoccupied with work, claiming long hours and late nights at the office. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that he was simply stressed. Yet I couldn't ignore the way he withdrew from the family. While I juggled the demands of raising 2 young children and managing the household, Edward seemed to drift further into his own world. He would come home late, often after Amelia and Oliver were already asleep. When I confronted him, he dismissed my concerns with excuses that felt hollow. "I'm doing this for us," he would say, his tone clipped. "Do you think I enjoy being away so much?" His words stung, but I tried to push my doubts aside. I told myself that marriage had its ups and downs, and we would find our way back to each other. After all, Edward had been my rock in the beginning. Surely he hadn't changed, not entirely. The moment I discovered the truth was both surreal and devastating. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Edward had left his laptop open on the dining table, something he rarely did. I wasn't snooping, but when a notification popped up from a messaging app I didn't recognize, curiosity got the better of me. What I found shattered my world. There were messages, dozens of them, between Edward and another woman. Her name was Margaret. She was older than me, and she had 2 children of her own. Their conversations were intimate, filled with inside jokes and references to moments they had shared. The messages left no room for doubt. Edward was having an affair. When he returned home that evening, I confronted him. For a moment, he tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. Finally, he admitted it, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "Margaret understands me in a way you don't anymore," he said, his words like a knife twisting in my chest. I couldn't believe the audacity of his justification. I had given everything to our marriage, to our family, and he had betrayed me with such casual indifference. For weeks, I lived in a haze of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Edward continued to act as though nothing had changed, maintaining his routine with an almost chilling normalcy. He played with the children, helped Amelia with her homework, and chatted with me over dinner as though his betrayal wasn't hanging in the air between us. But I couldn't move past it. Every interaction felt tainted, every memory of our romance a cruel joke. Eventually, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't let Edward's actions define me or dictate the future for me and my children. So I began the painful process of untangling my life from his. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I ignored the signs that Edward wasn't the man I thought he was. Perhaps I was too swept up in the romance, too eager to believe in the perfect love story. But I also know that the blame doesn't lie with me alone. Edward made choices that hurt me, hurt our children, and destroyed the trust we had built. Now, as I sit by the window, watching Amelia and Oliver play in the garden, I feel a bittersweet sense of peace. My life isn't the fairy tale I once dreamed of, but it's real. It's messy, imperfect, and filled with love. The kind of love that doesn't come from a flawed partner, but from within myself and my bond with my children. And while I regret marrying Edward, I will never regret the lessons I've learned or the strength I've gained. Some stories don't end with a happily ever after, but that doesn't make them any less meaningful. Sincerity, meaning being honest and genuine. Example, his words were filled with sincerity. Unwavering, meaning strong and steady, not changing. Example, his unwavering confidence impressed her. Cherished, meaning valued deeply and loved. Example, she cherished the moments they shared. Intentional, meaning done on purpose, planned. Example, his actions always felt intentional. Flourished, meaning grew or thrived successfully. Example, their romance flourished after the trip. To fade, meaning to slowly disappear or weaken. Example, his attentiveness began to fade over time. Confronted, meaning faced or challenged someone about an issue. Example, she confronted him about his late nights. Surreal, meaning strange, like a dream. Example, discovering the truth felt surreal, devastating, meaning extremely upsetting or damaging. Example, the messages she found were devastating. Snooping, meaning secretly looking at someone's things. Example, she wasn't snooping, but the messages popped up. Guilt, meaning a feeling of being sorry for doing something wrong. Example, his face showed guilt when he was caught. Defiance, meaning refusal to accept blame or rules. Example, he admitted the affair but with defiance. Betrayed, meaning broken trust or loyalty. Example, he betrayed her trust. Untangling, meaning separating or freeing from complications. Example, she began untangling her life from his. Bittersweet, meaning both happy and sad at the same time. Example, her memories were bittersweet after the separation.